The stage was set for a political showdown. It wasn't the kind fought in Congress or on the campaign trail, but one that was about to unfold live on primetime television. The nation was glued to their screens as Real Talk with Lisa Moreau, one of the most watched liberal talk shows in America, was about to host a guest who had never before granted an exclusive interview. Usha Vance, wife of Vice President J.D. Vance, was no ordinary political spouse. A Yale-educated attorney, she was known for her sharp intellect and unwavering composure. Unlike the typical second ladies of the past, Usha had largely stayed out of the limelight. She wasn't one for political drama or media skirmishes, but when an opportunity arose to set the record straight, she didn't hesitate. Lisa Moreau, a staunch progressive and a relentless critic of the Vance administration, had invited Usha for an interview under the guise of a balanced discussion. However, anyone familiar with Moreau's tactics knew that this wasn't going to be a polite conversation, it was a trap. The media had been buzzing for weeks about the Vance administration's policies on immigration, education, and family values. The left-wing press had painted J.D. Vance as a hardliner and Usha as the quiet enabler of his so-called extreme policies. Moreau had made it clear in previous episodes she saw Usha as complicit, and tonight she intended to put her on the spot. The studio lights blazed as Usha took her seat across from Moreau. Dressed in an elegant navy blue blazer, she exuded confidence but remained calm. The audience, predominantly liberal, was already murmuring in anticipation of what they expected to be a brutal takedown of the vice president's wife. Lisa Moreau leaned forward with a smirk. "Mrs. Vance, thank you for joining us tonight. I know you don't do many interviews, so I appreciate you stepping into the lion's den." A chuckle rippled through the audience. Usha smiled politely. "Thank you for having me, Lisa. Though I don't quite see it as a lion's den. Just an opportunity for a real conversation." Lisa's smirk faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Well, let's get right to it. You've been largely silent as your husband's administration has rolled out some of the most controversial policies in modern American history, policies that many argue are harmful to women, immigrants, and minority communities. Do you stand by your husband's decisions?" It was the first strike, an attempt to put Usha on the defensive. The audience leaned in, waiting for a flustered response. But Usha didn't miss a beat. She tilted her head slightly. "Lisa, it's interesting that you frame your question that way. You assume silence is complicity, but have you considered that maybe I choose to speak through actions rather than sound bites? My husband and I share values, yes, but we also have our own voices. My work as an attorney speaks for itself, as does my commitment to justice and fairness. So let's start by addressing the actual policies instead of broad accusations. Which specific policy are you referring to?" Lisa blinked. She hadn't expected Usha to redirect so smoothly. "Well," she said, shifting in her seat, "for instance, the administration's immigration stance. Your husband has taken a hardline approach, advocating for stronger border security and stricter immigration laws. Given your own background, your parents immigrated from India, don't you find that hypocritical?" Usha clasped her hands together on the table. "Lisa, do you believe in legal immigration?" Lisa hesitated. It was a simple question, but a loaded one. "I believe in a fair and just immigration system," she answered carefully. "Good," Usha nodded. "Then we agree. My parents came to this country legally, just like millions of others who follow the process. What my husband advocates for is ensuring that the system isn't abused, that we prioritize security and fairness. That's not hypocrisy, that's common sense." A murmur ran through the audience. Lisa opened her mouth to counter, but Usha wasn't done. "The real question," Usha continued, "is why so many in the media insist on conflating legal and illegal immigration. My parents worked hard, played by the rules, and gave me a future. Shouldn't we honor those who do it the right way instead of rewarding those who don't?" Lisa Moreau shifted in her chair. The energy in the room had shifted. The audience, who had been prepared to jeer at Usha, was now reconsidering their stance. This wasn't the passive political wife they expected, this was a woman who knew exactly what she was talking about. The interview was just getting started. Lisa Moreau was not used to being caught off guard. She was a seasoned interviewer, known for her ability to dominate conversations and put conservative guests on the defensive. But Usha Vance wasn't just any guest, she was turning the tables, and Lisa knew she had to regain control. Clearing her throat, Lisa leaned forward, changing tactics. "All right, let's talk about something even more personal, women's rights. Your husband has been a vocal advocate for traditional family values, and many see that as a direct attack on women's autonomy. Some say the Vance administration is dragging America backward. As an accomplished lawyer yourself, how do you reconcile that?" There it was. The insinuation that being a successful, modern woman was somehow incompatible with supporting her husband's policies. Usha didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled slightly as if she had been waiting for this exact question. I find it fascinating, she began, that the phrase family values has become controversial. Let's be clear, supporting strong families doesn't mean oppressing women. My husband and I believe that families, in all their forms, are the backbone of society. Encouraging strong family units, supporting parents, and valuing motherhood, how exactly is that an attack on women? Lisa raised an eyebrow. But don't you think policies that push for traditional roles limit women's choices? Usha shook her head. Lisa, if we're talking about choices, let's actually support them. What I find troubling is that modern feminism claims to empower women but often shames them for choosing motherhood, marriage, or prioritizing family. Why is it progressive for a woman to climb the corporate ladder but regressive for her to choose to raise her children at home? Real empowerment means respecting all choices, not just the ones that fit a certain political agenda. The audience was quiet. They weren't used to hearing this perspective articulated so clearly. Lisa, sensing she was losing ground, tried another angle. But what about policies that restrict access to abortion and reproductive rights? Many say that's not about choice at all, that's about control. Usha took a measured breath before responding. Lisa, I respect that this is a deeply emotional issue for many people. But let's talk about the language we use. When we say reproductive rights, we have to ask, who are we really talking about? Because there's another life involved. And I think we need to have honest conversations about what it means to support women, all women, including the unborn. A few gasps echoed through the studio. Lisa clenched her jaw slightly but masked her irritation with a tight-lipped smile. So, you believe the government should have a say in a woman's medical decisions? She pressed. Usha held her gaze steadily. I believe society should stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves. That's not just a political stance, that's a moral one. And if we are truly advocating for women's rights, we should also be advocating for better support systems for mothers, for affordable childcare, and for policies that don't push women into feeling like abortion is their only option. Lisa exhaled sharply. She had expected a scripted response, not this level of depth and conviction. So, you don't see this as a war on women? She asked, almost sarcastically. Usha let out a soft chuckle. Lisa, the real war on women is telling them that their worth is measured by how much they reject traditional values. Women are intelligent enough to make their own choices, whether that's in the boardroom or the nursery. And they don't need Hollywood, the media, or political activists telling them what empowerment looks like. There was a beat of silence. Then, unexpectedly, a few members of the audience began to clap. It was hesitant at first, but it grew louder. Even some of Lisa's most loyal viewers seemed shaken by Usha's unapologetic stance. Lisa straightened in her chair, forcing a smile. Well, you certainly don't hold back, she said, her voice tight. Usha smiled back, effortlessly composed. Why should I? The battle was far from over. Lisa Moreau was struggling to keep control of the interview. What was supposed to be an easy takedown of Usha Vance had turned into something else entirely, a showcase of confidence, clarity, and composure from a woman who was supposed to crumble under pressure. But Lisa wasn't finished yet. She shuffled her notes and adjusted her posture, trying to project authority. Mrs. Vance, let's address the elephant in the room. Your husband, Vice President J.D. Vance, has been labeled by many as a divisive figure, someone who promotes nationalism, conservative populism, and policies that some say are anti-democratic. And yet, you sit here defending his administration as if it's bringing America together. How do you respond to people who say your husband's leadership is a danger to democracy? The question hung in the air, weighted with the typical media buzzwords, divisive, nationalism, anti-democratic. It was designed to corner Usha, to make her stumble over a defensive response. But Usha didn't stumble. She didn't even blink. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and asked, Lisa, let's be honest, when was the last time you used those words to describe a liberal politician? Lisa's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She hadn't expected that. Usha continued, her voice calm but firm. You say my husband is divisive. But what does that really mean? Does it mean he challenges the establishment? That he speaks for working-class Americans who have been ignored for decades? That he doesn't bow to the media narrative? If so, then yes, I suppose he is divisive to people who are afraid of change. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Usha wasn't just answering questions, she was exposing the hypocrisy in them. Lisa forced a smile. So you don't believe nationalism is dangerous? Usha tilted her head. Lisa, if by nationalism you mean loving your country, respecting its laws and putting its citizens first, then tell me, why is that considered dangerous? Every nation looks out for its own people. But when an American does it, the media calls it nationalism with a negative connotation. Why? Lisa Moreau shifted uncomfortably. This was not how this was supposed to go. Usha pressed on. Let's talk about real dangers to democracy. What about the suppression of dissenting voices? What about tech companies and mainstream media silencing people who disagree with their narrative? What about the growing pressure to conform to one ideology or risk being labeled as dangerous? A few members of the audience actually nodded in agreement. They weren't conservatives, but they weren't blind either. Lisa sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. So you're saying the media is the problem? Usha smiled, but there was steel behind it. I'm saying the media plays a major role in shaping public perception, and too often it does so dishonestly. It's not about journalism anymore, it's about pushing an agenda. And when someone like my husband challenges that agenda, he's labeled divisive instead of brave. Lisa's face twitched, her carefully composed expression starting to crack. Usha folded her hands on the table and added, if democracy means open debate, fair elections, and protecting the rights of all Americans, not just the ones the media agrees with, then my husband and I stand by democracy completely. The real question is, does the media? The studio fell silent. For the first time in her career, Lisa Moreau didn't have a response. Lisa Moreau was running out of moves. Every attempt to corner Usha Vance had backfired, and the audience, her own audience, was beginning to reconsider their assumptions. But she had one last card to play, the idea that the Vance family was out of touch with ordinary Americans. She adjusted her earpiece, a signal from her producers urging her to regain control. Taking a breath, she put on a sympathetic expression and tried a softer approach. Mrs. Vance, I want to shift gears a bit. You and your husband often speak about representing the working class, fighting for the everyday American. But let's be honest, you're both Ivy League graduates, highly successful, and now part of the most powerful administration in the country. Do you really believe you can understand the struggles of the average American? The question was a clever one, designed to paint Usha as an out-of-touch elite trying to play populist. But Usha, as always, was ready. She let out a quiet chuckle before responding. Lisa, you know what's interesting? The people who say my husband and I are too successful to represent working Americans are the same people who idolize multimillionaire politicians in Washington, celebrities in Hollywood, and tech billionaires in Silicon Valley. Somehow, their wealth and power don't disqualify them from speaking about the working class. Why is that? Lisa's eyes flickered. She hadn't expected the question to be turned back on her so quickly. Usha continued, her voice steady and clear. My husband grew up in a struggling family in Ohio. He lived the reality of the working-class American, poverty, addiction, hardship. He pulled himself out of it through hard work and opportunity. And instead of turning his back on that experience, he fights every day to make sure others have the same chance. That's not being out of touch, that's remembering where you came from. A few members of the audience nodded. They had read Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance's memoir, and they knew his story. Lisa pressed on. But you, Mrs. Vance, didn't grow up in poverty. You were raised in a successful immigrant family. How can you claim to understand the struggles of everyday Americans? Usha's eyes softened, but her confidence remained. Lisa, my parents came to this country with almost nothing. They worked hard, sacrificed, and built a life for us. They believed in education, in discipline, in perseverance. Those values are universal. You don't have to grow up in poverty to understand the struggles of hardworking Americans, you just have to listen to them. And I do. Lisa inhaled sharply. The response was airtight. Usha leaned forward slightly. Let's talk about who's really out of touch. Is it my husband, who grew up in a poor town and worked his way up? Or is it the politicians who have spent decades in Washington getting richer while ignoring the people they claim to represent? Is it the media elites who look down on working-class Americans but never actually spend time with them? A quiet murmur rippled through the audience. Some were shifting in their seats, processing what she was saying. Usha smiled politely. Lisa, the truth is, my husband and I don't pretend to have all the answers. But we do believe in listening to the American people, not lecturing them. Lisa clenched her jaw, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. A small but noticeable applause broke out in the studio. It wasn't coming from conservatives, this was Lisa Moreau's audience. And they were clapping for Usha Vance. Lisa knew in that moment she had lost. Lisa Moreau could feel the momentum slipping away. Usha Vance had not only defended herself and her husband's administration, she had flipped the script entirely. The audience, which was supposed to jeer at the vice president's wife, was now clapping for her. Some members of Lisa's own loyal viewership were nodding in agreement. But Lisa wasn't ready to surrender just yet. She had one last attempt to regain control. Taking a deep breath, she forced a smile. Mrs. Vance, I have to admit you're very well-spoken. But let's cut through the rhetoric. What do you say to the millions of Americans who feel terrified of your husband's policies? The LGBTQ+ community, immigrants, women, racial minorities, there are people who truly believe this administration is harming them. Can you look into this camera and honestly say they have nothing to fear? Lisa leaned back, confident she had found the ultimate question. If Usha refused to acknowledge these concerns, she would seem cold and indifferent. If she admitted they had a reason to fear, she would be contradicting everything she had just argued. But Usha didn't hesitate. She turned directly to the camera, her brown eyes steady, her voice calm yet commanding. I want to speak to every American watching this, especially those who have been told to fear my husband or me or this administration. I understand your concerns. I know the media has painted a picture of us that may make you uneasy. But here's what I ask of you, don't let the media or politicians or activists tell you who to fear. Don't let them manipulate your emotions for their own gain. The audience was silent, hanging on to her every word. Even Lisa Moreau seemed momentarily stunned. Usha continued, her voice unwavering. My husband and I don't believe in fear. We believe in opportunity. We believe in America. We believe in a country where people can disagree and still respect each other. A country where your future isn't dictated by Washington but by your own hard work and determination. We are not your enemy. We are your neighbors, your friends, your fellow Americans. She paused, letting the words sink in. Then, with one final look into the camera, she delivered the moment that would be replayed on every news network, in every political ad, and across every social media platform. If you truly want to know who my husband is, what we stand for, don't take the media's word for it. Come talk to us. Listen to our actions, not just the headlines. And most importantly, think for yourself. The studio erupted. Not in boos. Not in sneers. But in applause. Not just polite applause, genuine, resounding applause. Some of Lisa Moreau's most loyal viewers were giving Usha Vance a standing ovation. Lisa's face had drained of color. She forced a tight smile, but it was clear she had lost complete control of the interview. She glanced at her producers behind the cameras, who were frantically gesturing for her to wrap it up. With barely concealed frustration, Lisa turned back to her guest. Well, Mrs. Vance, I appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight. Usha simply smiled. Thank you, Lisa. I enjoyed the conversation. And with that, she stood, shook Lisa's hand, and walked off the stage with effortless grace. Within hours, the internet was on fire. Usha Vance destroys liberal host on live TV. Wife of VP J.D. Vance silences the media with one perfect response. This interview changed everything. Clips of Usha's final statement went viral across social media. Millions of Americans, conservative, moderate, even some liberals, were sharing it, praising her poise, her intelligence, and her ability to dismantle the media's narrative without a single raised voice. Even mainstream networks were forced to admit Usha Vance had just done something remarkable. She had walked into one of the most hostile interviews of her life and walked out a national sensation. And in that moment, America knew this was not just the wife of the vice president. This was a woman who could change the course of history.